everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And thanks for being here with us this evening. It's been a few weeks since we've been here, and we have just had all kinds of fun summer things going on. So we were packing for vacation and on vacation and all kinds of fun stuff right before that. I don't even remember. But
cherry picking.
Yeah, cherry picking. Yeah, all kinds of fun things in between. But the last that we talked was that water temperatures were like super warm. They were way up there, and we were talking about all that. And the nice thing is, at least since then, things have cooled down at least a smidge.
Yeah, it's from where we were prior to our last time we talked. It's gone down almost 10 degrees, so that's always nice. I did hear, some of the spots when we were out of town, some of our local spots got a little warm again, but I think we're cooled back down. The days aren't getting as warm. And we have gotten a little bit of rain by us, but not very much.
And I think everyone is actually hoping for a bit more because it's really dry out there despite this humidity. So I don't know how those two things are both happening at the same time. But overall, I think we've seen some consistent patterns is one of the things that means, right? And so typically when you see that consistency from day to day, that lends itself to a pretty decent bite. As I was watching the weather coming up to this coming weekend, I was seeing the possibility for some rain. But it seems, at least in our area, that might be pushing off. And so I think we still have a whole bunch of clouds, but clouds do not deter fish, or me, to be honest. And so I think, I was going to say a whole bunch of fishing in our future. I guess we'll see. Just a weekend's worth, right? But we have a whole bunch more to talk about with our vacation and how we've been targeting fish and all of those different things. So we normally start out with a fishing report, and I guess that was a little hint at what we'll talk about for, most of the rest of the show. But today we are going to be talking about tips and techniques and what works for us. I guess mostly what works for us, because there's all different kinds of ways to be targeting fish and all things that will work. And I think actually I'm going to sneak in a few of those hints as we go along, right? But if people at home have questions or comments or things along the way, definitely put that in our comment section, because we'll talk about that with you as well. Or if you have a fishing report that you want to share, what your water temps are, we would love to hear maybe your general area and what those temps are, because it's cool to see those trends across the different areas and where people are and what fish are doing. So I know in summer, this is maybe, oh my gosh, I was going to say arguably one of the most consistent patterns that we have across the Midwest. And I would just say that because everybody at this point is kind of at the peak of their warmth, right? And so we are all fishing summer patterns. And so unless you're in like super, super deep lakes or super, super shallow lakes, I would say your average lake, your average fish are doing average things. And that sounds kind of silly. But there's a lot of times where you can't depend on patterns and averages, but this time of year might be that time. So I guess, Josh, where do we start this time of year?
Okay, well, do you want to just kind of go through our vacation and talk about that, or do you want to just go right into fishing?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because a lot of times for fishing, we know what we're doing because we're going to a spot, at this point. So that's an interesting point. So I think either way we get to that point. So let's dissect what we did on vacation. And I think that's a great point to start, because what we did is we broke down a body of water as if it was new to us. So we actually had been there before. One time, it was a year ago. Yeah, look at his face once. It was a full weekend. So I don't know, not that that's all that much time. Look at your face, whatever, you can laugh. But we spent a good number of hours on the lake that weekend. And so well, you're still laughing. I know that's the thing, is there's never ending things to learn about water, but you collect those puzzle pieces as you go. And I would say last year we had a really good bite, and I think we learned a lot. But part of the thing is then we were there a different time of the year. We were there late September. And so it was still some warm days. It was still, I remember it's sunshine. It was rainy. It was really terrible weather, actually.
When we were there the first time.
When we were there the first time, yeah. And so being here this time was actually totally different in that way, So we had the summer pattern. We had a ton of boats around. It had all these different factors. But ultimately, those water temps being warmer, we did have to dissect this water as if it was brand new to us.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were up in the Hayward area, and so we don't often get up that way for extended periods of fishing. So, like she said, we were up there kind of in almost a fall pattern last year, and this year we went out, and one of my favorite times of year, like towards the middle and end of summer, um, just because the bite is so consistent. And so basically, what you have to do, or what we did, is like the first night we were there, because we were there 5 nights, and the first night we were there, first day, you just have to find those spots, right? And so not every every lake's going to have those spots that's going to be consistent with panfish this time of year, but you have to search for them, and they're not usually super huge. They can be half of a lake or an entire lake, just depending on what lake you're there.
Well, and I'm going to jump in here really
Yeah.
fast, because when you're talking about find those places where those fish are hanging out, what you're talking about is the bigger fish, right? Because that's the thing, is like you can go up to the boat ramp and you can go right off the dock and see like a bajillion bluegills, be like, this is a spot that they are, But I think that this part of the season, and especially into fall, in some of those cases, fish are separating by size, because those little ones are hanging out a little bit more shallow, and those deeper ones are pushing off, and in my opinion, hunting a little bit more, right? If we're talking about walleyes, for sure. If we're talking about crappies, yes. Even if we're talking about bluegills, I think that those bigger ones push off slightly deeper, and they're eating that slightly larger profile forage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you kind of just have to figure out what the panfish are relating to your initial time there. Hey, Gene. And once you kind of figure out what they're relating to, you can start looking at the maps. You can start pulling up Onyx and just taking peeks and looking at like what matches.
Well, and so again, when we're talking about summer and having that basis of that consistency, a lot of times what that means is those weed edges. And so if you have really dark lakes, sometimes that's that little shallower you find where those weeds end. In a really clear lake, you might have deep weeds much farther out. And we're talking about that both those places, right? That's very different depending on your body of water, but apply it as it was to you. And so in this case, there were different bays of this. It's a pretty big lake. There were bays that had these very predictable weed lines.
Yeah, and weed lines are a good example. I mean, you could just have like shelves. You could have drop offs. You can have brush that's in a row. You could have reeds that are a big reed bed or something. It just depends on your type of lake, what you're fishing, where those fish are going to be holding, because and it does change from day to day where prevailing winds shift, because that's where the forage shifts usually. And you hear a lot about that talked about in walleye fishing, or if you're fishing bass,
but it's true,
but
for
it's
all
the
fish.
same for all fish, right? Because all of those little baby fish that everything is eating have to eat something, and that's why they're following the wind blown shorelines, is because that the little bugs and stuff are getting pushed that way. So that's kind of the first step, is we just find spots that match together, and then when you go look at that new spot, and if you catch fish there, then you try and find another spot. And then by day 3, you can have then it's pretty predictable, right? Now you just are looking at your weather and mainly the wind for me, and I go pick one of those spots that I found that has wind blowing into it, and wind comes from predominantly 4 directions generally, so like it doesn't have to be perfect perpendicular in, but anything that's blowing towards your spots, go try those spots, and there's going to be fish there.
Well, and when you're talking about the wind, I think very windy days, we tend to be trolling.
Yeah.
Kind of windy days, we do a little bit more of a drift. We actually had a lot of success with drifting this weekend, even with bobbers. So maybe we'll hit on that a little bit later. I don't want to jump topics too much, right?
No,
but certainly in situations where it's not very windy, you still want to know where the wind had been, right? Because that's where that forage had been pushed those last few days. And so a lot of times it doesn't just like scram out of there, right? No. And so if you know where that wind had been, that's those cases where we are able to, use bobbers and toss those weed edges. Now, there's a lot of people out there who they will just go and do bobbers and toss at weed edges all summer long. And to some extent, that might work. But one of the things that we're talking about here is targeting those bigger fish. And to some extent, that's how we find them.
Yeah. And so I think for me, a lot of times, bobber fishing weed edges, one, can be really hard, especially if you are fishing with inexperienced people or kids or stuff, because generally this time of year, the weeds you're not able to see them. And so like it's hard for people to visualize, like, when you anchor up, where you have to throw those bobbers. And if you aren't anchoring with a trolling motor, if you're anchoring with your anchor, you have a tendency to scare fish away. If you don't scare the fish away, you catch a handful of fish and then they move on, or the school kind of shuts down, and then you have to go through the whole process again. And to me, it's a real grind. And that's why, a lot of panfish anglers kind of condemn this time of year, but it's why I celebrate it. And that's why we're here kind of talking about trolling and drifting, is because I think that that those two tactics really keep spots from being burnt out. And you can extend like 500 feet of shore, or 500 feet of shoreline, 200 yards of shoreline, into a whole day's worth of fishing. You just troll down, and you can either troll back. Sometimes it doesn't matter. The bite is consistent both ways. I find that trolling one way is more productive than the other way usually. But you always have to try once, and then you just motor back to the beginning and you troll it again. And it's you can fish it all day and you consistently get bites. You start to pick out spots where you're like, okay, everybody get ready. And then you might pull one fish, you might pull 3 fish if you have 3 people with lines in the water. It keeps it interesting.
Let's dissect this a little bit though, because you had glazed over some really, I guess, in my opinion, good points really fast. So you were talking about to not burn spots out, because in my opinion, a lot of times what happens is you see people and they find fish and they're like, they're right here, whatever it is, a fish is clumped by weeds, a dock, or whatever, I don't know, whatever it is, the fish are here. And I think so often, especially when you have people in the boat and it's like, oh, let's catch these, cast at them. And that's the thing, is you catch 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. Sometimes the fish are really spooky. You catch one and they all are out of there. Sometimes you catch all of them and then they're all gone, and so it just depends on how long those fish are willing to sit there. We don't get to choose that, right? But when you have that situation where you're trolling past and then all of a sudden, like, the one from the school is gone, and it's like, seems like the other fish don't notice it very much. And so we find that's what you're saying, is you come back to, oh, you can almost predict where those fish are going to bite, because again, by that weed bed, by that dock, by that whatever it is, because you're coming past it, your bait comes past it, and then that fish, it reaches out from that school, it grabs that bait, and so you again can almost predict it. So once you get to know those patterns, is again, like we were saying, this is coming full circle, when you can again look at a map and find other similar areas. And that's one of those places, that's when you learn how to find fish.
Well, and I think maps are a good place to start. But once you get out there, another thing that I like to pay a lot of attention to is the type of vegetation. And so the 2 big ones for me, for bluegills and crappies, is what a lot of anglers call cabbage. And so that's the tall, really broad-leaved aquatic plants. And sometimes they'll hit the top of the water. A lot of times they're just like a foot or 2 under the water. But they're usually pretty tall. And so this time of year, they're going to be, it can be 8 feet deep and they can be up to 1.5 feet from the top. And so they can be pretty tall plants. They don't usually grow in huge clumps. Usually it's like you are probably not going to get an entire shoreline weed edge of just that. But then you're going to have stuff like Cara, and that's what a lot of people like call the carpet. And so that can be like a foot to 2 feet off the bottom, and it's very flat. And then it looks like little spiked little stuff on the bottom when you hook it. That stuff, fish like to sit on top of that stuff. That stuff gives off a lot of oxygen. And it's
Forage
just
for bugs.
yeah, it's just a good
redworms.
spot to sit, but there's no place to hide, right? And so you could have a whole weed line of that and not catch anything. So you kind of just have to see where you have your beneficial plants. Coontail is another one that I really like. Coontail and the cabbage are the two that I really like for panfish. But when you're looking for these trolling or drifting zones, you can have a big area of Cara, that's fine, and fish will cruise that, and you'll pick up fish. But what you're looking for are those pockets of that coontail or the cabbage, because when you come past that, that's usually where the fish are sitting to ambush, or it's a reaction strike. A lot of times, in my opinion, when something comes past them and they just kind of like grab it quick. And
so while you're talking about weeds, let's also talk about, because I know that you know about this, when people are coming around their lakes and they're finding these spots that are super slimy, like they're full of this slime, does that act the same as the weed beds? Can you target fish there the same, or is that different?
I mean, you probably can. There's probably fish in it, but it's not very conducive to fishing. So when you're saying slime, you're probably referring to filamentous algae. It's not a bad thing. It just looks kind of gross, smells kind of bad.
It's hard to pick off your line because there's
It's
always
hard to pick
more
off your
there.
line.
It breaks easy, but it's just more there.
But bugs like it and stuff, and so like the fish aren't probably gonna hang out in it. It's usually not this time of year, depending on your body of water, you're not really gonna get slime out in that that 8 to 12 feet of water. Usually it's up a little bit further when you start getting emergent vegetation and stuff, where because that it's filament, like it has that stringiness,
Like, yeah.
and so that can that gets caught on some of those other plants that are sticking out of the water, and it allows it to not get pushed up against shore. And yeah, so it's not something that I generally look for. I try to avoid it because I don't like fishing through it, but sometimes you don't really have a choice.
That is true. I'm thinking of different things that you come across on the shoreline, because you've done a good job about talking about like those reed edges versus weeds versus these different things. But one of the things that I do love to do is when you have a lake and they have done one of those projects where they do like tree drops, but I'm not talking middle of the lake. I'm talking when they like drop them dang near on the bank and you're like, what is that for? And it turns out because it's the minnow habitat, right? If you have good forage, hopefully that means good fish. But this is one of those times of the year where I feel like, especially some of those big fish, because a lot of those tree drops are kind of not very far from those weed edges that we're talking about, right? And so if you do have a calm night, that is a really great place just on the exterior, right? You don't even have to be that super precise casting in the middle of all the brush. That's not even, right? Because in this time of the year, that bait, those tiny little minnows, they're hanging out in that brush, the weeds, and then when they come out, they swim out of that area is when they get ambushed by those bigger predator fish. And so it's a really great time if you are dead set on using bobbers. That is a way to go about that.
Yeah, you can target those. To me, I feel like a lot of times, until unless you're fishing the low light hours, I feel like that's usually where you're going to catch some of your eater fish. That's going to be a lot your mid-tier size class, because they also will hide in there, so they'll hang around those brush piles and they'll pick off the easy food and this and that. But I really treat big bluegills and big crappies like I would a walleye or a bass or a pike, because a lot of times 12-inch fish is a pretty formidable hunk of meat for a fish to eat, so for a bigger predator to eat. So you really have to be a big fish, and so when those bigger panfish get up to that size, they have to worry less about some of the smaller predators, and that's why those smaller predators are going to be pushed in towards those, little bait areas, and the bigger ones are going to be sitting out in the weed edges looking for some of those, even crappies will eat small crappies or little bluegills, or perch is a great example. Everything eats little perch, and so that they're sitting out there waiting for that. And I think this is going back to talking about structures. I think one overlooked one for panfish is rocks. You can have a nice rock shelf, and they don't mark, panfish don't mark very well in electronics in the first place, but especially in rocks, I don't think they mark very well, just because they tend to hold in the rocks, and because there's kind of a round shape anyways, and they're thin, it's kind of like sonar camouflage for them. But you can come by and troll some of those little rock humps, and you'll pick up, in my opinion, probably more bigger bluegills than you will crappies a lot of the times. But the walleyes are mixed in with everything, or you'll catch a pike here or there, bass here or there. But I've had lakes where there is a rock pile bite, like the fish migrate there in the morning or in the late afternoon, and they hit a bunch of whatever they're eating there, minnows or what have you, and then they'll go back to their weeds. And so you just have to keep an eye out for spots like that, because it's not only walleyes that hit those rock piles.
That is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we have talked a lot about presentations and kind of moving around to find these fish and target these fish. And we started out talking about how it's a little bit predictable, and now we've thrown a bunch of things at people. I mean, I guess not really, right? But one of the other things that I feel like is pretty predictable in summer is my go-to for bait. And I think that is because, to be honest, almost everything is at that point where it's eating, I don't know, like some of that bigger stuff. It's on to summer. We're on to the summer bite, right? Like everything is eating minnows. And I think it's easy to kind of assume that, at least off the bat. There are some exceptions. We'll talk about maybe bug hatches when they come through, or leeches or things like that. But I would say my go-to bait in the summer is a minnow. Is that true for you? Or like a twisty tail?
Yeah. I would say a twister or paddle tail is usually what I go to. Something in the 2 or 3 inch range. 2 inches is scientifically the most probable forage for almost every fish, no matter what the size. That just happens to be a good size for everything, even if you're big.
What if you think of like a 2-inch minnow? Like how? That's pretty natural size.
Yeah. Well, and it just is pretty abundant in the fact that most fish that are 2 inches are probably, especially this time of year, were probably just born. So there's a lot of them. And, if you're a really big fish and you're cruising around and you have an easy one to nab, why not? It's like having a little M&M snack or something. But if you're a 6-inch fish and it's an easy snack, that's a big meal for you. But either way, the majority of fish that are eating little fish, it's that 2-inch size. So I like, if you're catching a lot of fish, me personally, if you're catching a lot of fish and you're just like looking for some of the bigger ones, or you're looking for the big one, I usually bump it up a little bit, just a little bit. Like I'm not going to go to a 5-inch bait.
Oh,
hey, Jim.
Jim, we almost called you for dinner the other day.
We did. But I would just bump it up to like that 3-inch, 2.7. We're lucky enough that we pour our own baits, and we bought bait molds specifically for the types of fishing that we do. But
it doesn't have to be that specific.
No, it doesn't. It really, like 2 to 3 inch. If you have those two sizes, and really for colors, if you have white, black, and chartreuse, that's gonna cover most of Wisconsin.
But the other thing that you did mention that was a really kind of interesting point is you mentioned, so both are minnow, the paddle tail and the twisty tail.
Yeah.
And then you kind of talked all about twisty tail. So how do you decide those instances where you instead choose the paddle tail?
I think a paddle tail is just another way for me to weed out some of the smaller fish. It just has a wider profile. It's a little
On the
bit
tail.
well on the tail, but on the body too, and it's a little bit more intrusive. I would think in my mind it's a little more intimidating than a twister tail, because once you get a twister tail going and flattened out in the water, it's a little more delicate. I feel like where a paddle tail is just a little bit more aggressive, and so using that in accordance with the size, like I usually start with a twister tail because when I'm searching for fish, I just want to find out where fish are. And then if we're catching a lot of fish, I'll bump up to see if we're going to catch anything bigger there. Because a lot of times, especially the later in the summer into the fall you go, those big crappies will start to separate out, and they start to school it by size class. So if I'm catching a bunch of 7s and 7 to 10s, and I size up and I keep catching 7 to 10s, then I'm going to probably move on, because unless I'm, unless I'm trying to get a few to eat, in which case, then I'll stay there and grab a couple. But otherwise I'll move to another spot that's similar, because there's, at the end of the day, those bigger fish are still crappies. But I'll try and change just one little variable, like let's find a coontail bed in the same situation versus a cabbage bed, or vice versa, or maybe some rocks, or maybe a little deeper, or something that just is a little bit different, but majority of the same.
Well, and ultimately you have to think about, especially when we're talking about trolling or drifting, certainly trolling is faster than drifting. But you have to think of, I know this sounds silly, but from a fish's perspective. Oh, I was just going to talk about that you had up. That's okay, but people get it. Because you have to think of from a fish's perspective, right? So as they are sitting in those weed beds, whether they are literally just sitting there waiting for forage minnows to come by, or sometimes they're actively, looking around, searching around, cruising the area. But then what happens is your bait comes by. And so if it's at the drift pace, or I guess it depends on how windy it is, or a trolling pace is a little bit smoother and faster than that. But those fish, this becomes kind of that reactionary bite. And so when you're talking about that twister tail, and it kind of has that smoother, slower reaction, that paddle tail, it has that kind of harder thumping action. And that was Jim's comment on the crappie scrub, the double tail. I think at that point, all you're looking for is that something eye-catching for those fish to want to go and grasp onto, right? I think especially in ice fishing that we talk about, like, fish are interested in things that they haven't seen before, right? But I think when we talk about, again, trolling, it's coming by a whole lot faster. And so things that are, different, novel, they might come after. But you want something, I guess, that is minnow enough to actually make them bite. So kind of a fun balance of, a bait that does a lot, but maybe not too crazy.
Well, and you have to remember too, like, just because you're trolling doesn't mean you have to have something that is super wiggly either. We stopped at a spot on our way home. We were gonna hit somewhere for dinner, and it was a little early, so we just stopped into a park and casted from shore, even though we had our boat with, and we were just casting around. And you pointed out that there was a bunch of tadpoles.
Oh my God, like a million. It was actually pretty crazy.
And tadpoles, they don't really, like, their tails don't wiggle around very much. Like they kind of swim a little bit, but like it's not a flapping action like a minnow or anything. So like you could pull something like a Bobby Garland stinger, just a stinger style shad bait, or drift those, and that can be part of your color scheme too, like a darker brown or something like that in clear water they might be eating a bunch of tadpoles. You never know. So don't overlook stuff like that too. Yeah.
You know, you're making an interesting point about the tadpoles. That's a good connection. I guess I hadn't considered that until you mentioned it, which is funny. But it does make me laugh because for a lot of our vacation, I did use that stinger style bait, which isn't really my go-to. Normally, I use more of a twisty tail, and it's just because I had a whole bunch of Mr. Twister. What do they call them? The sassy stingums, but it's that stinger tail bait. And it just happened that I had the colors that they were biting on, which was in my bag, so I was using those. But I was actually doing something really unique with them, and I had put them just on a jig and caught fish that way, right? That's just exactly what we're talking about. But the other thing I was doing is putting them on the back end of the MEP spinners. So I had a few comic combos. Those are bigger, some of the size 2s. Crappies were loving those when we were trolling them. But then I used some of the really teeny tiny. I had some True V's, so a hot pink blade, and I got them made with a single hook. I didn't even want a treble hook on the back. But then that was nice because I was able to put that stinger style plastic right on that back. And even though the bait itself was not really all that flashy, the blade on that bait was. And you know, you're talking about in the first place using a paddle tail bait. Sometimes when you have too many like little fish, like pick, that paddle tail can kind of weed some of that out. But I found that stinger tail, I don't know, holds together pretty well. I didn't get very picked at, but with that blade, I had a lot of success because it just kept the action of that bait up. So that was something I did a little bit different this time and would definitely do again.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a fair point. Nobody's asked the question in the comments yet, but inevitably everybody wants to know, like, how fast are you going? And so, like, this is something that holds true for drifting and for trolling, right? So those two, they're pretty much the same in my opinion. One you just do perpendicular to your structure, and one you do parallel to your structure. But same concept. So basically, you want to be between 7 and you want to be between 7.7 and 1.2. And I know that seems like a really big range, but here's why. So I like to keep the sizes of my baits consistent for variable sake. Like, I don't like switching up like weight size, like jig head sizes and stuff like that, because I don't want that to be another variable that I have to take into account when I'm putting all these puzzle pieces together. Speed is a lot easier to control. I can go from 0.7 to 1.2 faster than I can switch out my jig heads and test it, right? And so I usually use a 1/16 ounce, and if I'm fishing 12-foot weeds, I might want to go 0.7 or 0.8. If the weeds are only coming up to 8 or 7 feet, and I need my jig head to be 4 feet under the water, I need to go a little bit slower. And the nice thing about that is it keeps your bait in that spot longer. When you're going faster, that bait goes by pretty quick. And if you have aggressive fish, that's fine. But if you don't, the aggressive fish are still going to eat a slow bait, but the non-aggressive fish will not eat a fast bait, if that makes any sense. So I like to play with my speed depending on my depth. And if we're in 4 feet of water fishing 2 foot or 3 foot weeds, I might go 1.2. And yeah, I'll troll. And we have lakes that I troll in 3 or 4 feet of water, and it's gin clear, and we still get a bunch of fish. And that's where the fish hold all summer. I don't quite understand why they do that in that lake. It's just really weird. I always find myself wanting to migrate further out. Like, I just know, and generally in most lakes, like, you want to get out to that deeper weed edge where you start getting a little bit of separation between the weed tops and the top of the water. But those fish, they don't like that. They like to be in the shallows in that lake, and so you just have to find those patterns, right?
So I'm going to jump in here really quick because I'm having this moment where I'm sitting here thinking, like, Yeah, that doesn't sound so hard, and it doesn't necessarily. But we've talked about
Everything
speed.
lights in
We've
the
talked about baits, and we're in this case
Mm-hmm.
talking about plastics, twisty tails, and
Oh,
those
hey, Troy.
applications. But the other thing that we have not talked about is sometimes people think trolling, and they think like, oh my gosh, sometimes people go out like trolling for walleyes, and it's like all this gear, and it's all this stuff,
Mm.
and it's like hard and specific, and it doesn't have to be for walleyes
No.
either. I'm being dramatic, but I think I'm being dramatic for a reason, is because for panfish it literally could not be easier. And so we're going to take a minute, let's describe this setup. So we take our rod, and usually we have lights, medium lights, it depends on, well, usually our lights,
Light power rods is what she's saying.
yeah, like yeah. And so look at your face. Do you want to talk about this?
Troy, we're just no, I was just reading Troy's comment. We're just going
Oh
through
yeah,
the whole
no,
trolling setup right now.
We realized we just got there. Yeah. So, but I'm gonna be honest. The type of rod that you use, almost, I don't know, use what you've got, like try it out, because it's a little bit of a forgiving technique. I guess that's like hard to suggest and say like that. But like, don't get so caught up in having to have the perfect rod to panfish troll with, because chances are that whatever you're using for casting and retrieving type of technique is going to work for this. Because what you're going to do is, and again, we're using between 4 and 6 pound leader line, and so then a jig head, I don't know, between, I don't know, a 16th, an 8th, a 32nd. That's what I'm saying. It depends on how tall your weeds are, what's on the end of your line. That's the thing, is so put your bait on. We just talked all about those. But there's no planer boards, there's no extra weights, there's no things, there's no specific distance, right? So you get your favorite little jig, you get your favorite little plastic and the color that works on that lake, or cross your fingers and pick your favorite, right? And so that's what you do, is you just take your rod and you do like a little cast. Now, Josh, I would hit him over the head if this was real, right? Like, but you do just like a little like we're not doing like a hard whip it out there. We're not trying to reach the shore. We're just like getting
30-foot cast,
like
maybe.
Oh my gosh, I don't even do that.
No.
Maybe 20, maybe 30. I guess if I really think about it, maybe just like a little swoosh out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what you want to do is, well, if your weeds are all the way at the top, then get going a little bit, right? Because you don't want to just first get caught up in the mess of weeds, right?
When
you want to have a little bit of tension on that line, right? Just going through the water. And then as you are going, you feel that tension to start. I always let like one more arm length of line out. And then again, you don't want that bait to fall too far into the water, right? Because you don't want to grab onto all those weeds. And so then make sure that you're trolling, get that line going. But you just kind of want to get the line about that much out there. Sometimes Josh does 2 arm lengths of line, but that's the thing, is you're going to know that you have the right length out, because you are going to hit the occasional top of weed edge. You'll feel like tick, tick, but you're not going to be like catching them and snagging them and reeling.
Once in a while you will, because you're going to catch, because you inevitably there's going to be one tall one or something, or you're going to have floating weeds. Like, you're going to be picking weeds off your line, but it shouldn't be constantly. Like, you shouldn't be like burrowing through the weeds. Like Emily said, you should be skipping off the tops of most of them. And if you're not feeling that, then let a little bit of line out. If you are burrowing through weeds, you're gonna have to reel up, clean that off, and then cast a little bit less, and then let it troll for a little bit, and then let a little bit of line out. That's one reason why I do like a paddle tail, is because especially at slower speeds, you can really tell when you have even a tiny little strand of weeds on your line. It'll stop all your action. And so with a paddle tail, like I can pull it forward and feel the thump in my rod. And so I know that there's no weeds on it if I haven't gotten a bite in a while. But yeah, you just want to be ticking the top of the weeds, really, is all the goal is here.
And I'll be honest, I like a jig that's on that lighter end, because then I think it's a little bit easier to stay higher up in that water column, and it's easier for me to let line out versus being caught up in weeds all the time. So I think once in a while, Josh will be using a jig that's even a little bit bigger than what I'm using. And it's funny because we're fishing the same boat. How could it be different? But I think to some extent, like I said before, it's a little bit of a forgiving presentation. And so you use what works best for you. Also really nice, because if you do come upon a spot where there is just a huge school of fish, maybe you do just want to stop and cast at them. Once in a while, that does happen, right? We talked about not blowing out the spots and continuing on, but sometimes you stop. And the nice thing is that once you have that trolling presentation, reel that in, you're right back to just your jig and your plastic, and you can cast and retrieve. You can do all kinds of different things. Maybe you come upon a point where you just have to cast at whatever mark it is that you just saw in your graph, right? You can even just pop on and off the different plastic and have, maybe more of a walleye bite versus that panfish. And so, again, super, super flexible for whatever you're doing at that moment. Why are you laughing? I see you.
No, I'm just trying to think. And so we start, you can obviously tell this is a presentation that we're pretty passionate about, and it's a lot of fun. Because we kind of started talking about like the equipment, and then we kind of got sidetracked about just like talking about trolling again. So basically we're talking about using light to medium light action rods, somewhere between 6.5 to 7 to 8 feet, depending on what you got. I think you mentioned 6 to 4 pound leader line. If you guys use leaders, I like to use leaders. The main line
braid,
the main line braid. I switched over to the
fins braid.
Well, we've had fins. Yeah, we've been using fins. This is our second year. It's been awesome. And I think I switched all my panfish stuff over to the 2 pound. And
I went up a little bit. We catch big fish.
And so I run that. I run a 6 pound leader on my 2 pound, and she runs a 6 pound leader on her 6 pound. And it doesn't have to be a long leader. I don't feel like, even in clear water, I don't really feel like it is too invasive to have like only 2 feet of line out.
Oh my god! Look at you. Okay, so here's the thing: is like sometimes you just gotta you lose a jig maybe once in a while.
Well,
sometimes you change the color. I don't know, by the end of summer, because I should change my.
You should change your leader if you haven't changed it for
But that's the thing.
Cut it down,
cut it down, and then sometimes by the end of summer, and I'm using like a leader that's like this big. It's like
6 inches.
Stupidly small, but I am still caught fish.
Yeah. And so we covered rods, we covered line. The rods we're using, like Emily said, they're like partially they're our general just like cast and retrieve rods. So you're talking like a 2000 or 3000 series reel. And when like I'm using that super light 2 pound line, Emily's using 6. But if you're into using that braid, really do some mono backing on it. Save yourself some money. Don't fill that whole thing up with that braid.
Oh my gosh.
You only need like 150 yards, 200 yards. You don't need that much. And if you have a fish that's running that much, you're already trolling. Just turn your trolling motor on and chase it around. It's not, it's not like you need that much line on there. So just make sure you put that mono backing on there. Yeah, and that's pretty simple. You just hold it over the side of the boat, and it's really funny because you can really tell the different fish, because perch feel like it's a very rapid like tapping.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yep, because they're biting it and shaking their heads.
We call them machine gun bites.
Yeah, and then bluegills will really just like they'll just hammer it. It'll just be like a bite and wait. And it's almost like it's very similar to pike bites, honestly. Like they just hit it and they just run with it. My favorite is crappies, and it's really fun because it's like they come up from behind the bait and you can feel it, because you feel the initial bite, and then for a second there's no weight, and then there's a bunch of weight on there, and so you can tell. Yep, you can tell that that's going to be a crappie. And one thing that I do, this is a personal preference, but not only does it is it a little bit better for the health of the fish, but it's also enables me to get back in the water faster, is because there's always tension on my line, I just pinch my barb down. I don't need a barb, because it's the boat's pulling against it. there's no way for it to really get off. I don't really lose that many fish comparatively to having a barb.
Well, and that's the thing with when you're trolling for fish. So
right.
when you're sitting down, you might be blown out of spot eventually. The fish might like run out. I don't know. And with trolling, you just keep moving on. There's always going to be a new school of fish, a new bite, a new whatever. And so you're right. Like occasionally you do maybe miss a fish or one pops off or whatever, and that's just fine because then you just keep going on. But let's bring this a little bit full circle because we talked in the beginning about how did we find fish for our vacation. And this is something that almost anybody can apply to their home lake, wherever they are, wherever, to be honest, right now. And so we were talking about how we started out with trolling, and we talked about looking for weed lines, weed edges. And so that's something that you can do visually or with graphs. And so it doesn't matter how much technology you do or don't have on your boat. That's something that you can at least begin, start out with, right? And so from there, you do get to kind of specialize and use whatever tools are at your disposal. And that's great because you can fine tune in. But ultimately, as long as you can find that weed edge or where the weeds are growing out to and kind of troll along that contour, look for where those wind blown areas are, focus on those first. That's what we did is we would troll along and we would catch fish along the way and just kind of note, well, fish were in that bay best, or they were in that area best, or whatever that is. And then, sometimes we did come back, we visited those areas. Sometimes we look for similar trends. But that is the thing. Once you can start to find any trends in where those fish are, then you get to make that choice instead of where are they? It's like, should we do weed lines or should we do, whatever else? And then the nice thing is you do, like we said, get to accent that situation by the different graphs and things that you have. So let's say that we're moving along and on side scan, side imaging, you all of a sudden see, like, oh, hey, just out there, there's a crib, and in that moment, you'll be able to see right away, are there fish there? Are there not? Either way, mark that because that's going to be a great spot in fall or winter, whatever that is, right? We're fishing this season right now, but I'm also going to be fishing those fish then, right? And so the more homework that you can do now and mark off those spots now is going to be helpful for you later.
That's one of the great things about trolling and drifting too, is you just get to cover so much more water. The scenery changes. It's just a dynamic way to fish, and it can be really fast paced too. You could get a lot of doubles or triples if you have that many people in the boat. And you see a lot of these guys running planer boards, and they have like 6 rods out of the side of the boat trolling for walleyes. Thered be no way I could do that for panfish. It would be a mess. You would not be able to keep up. But we have a couple minutes left here, and we were going to touch on drifting with bobbers. And so drifting with bobbers is pretty much the same as you would do with drifting jigs. So just like trolling with jigs, drifting with jigs, you just toss it out there a little bit, and you just let line out until you hit the weed edges. And sometimes it's a lot, and sometimes it's not a lot. So you just have to kind of play with it. A lot of times your drift, a good, breezy day that's not like rollers or like super wavy, you might only get 0.7 out of it, 0.8. But when you start getting into those days when you have a breeze, but it's not quite enough to pull a jig effectively, so you're talking like 0.5 or 0.6, maybe even 0.4 miles an hour. That's when I'll bust a bobber out to drift a bobber. And so you just, same deal, same side of the boat. So the wind's blowing towards your boat, you're moving backwards, you toss your bobber into the wind, and you can,
because it'll still pull with you.
Yep, it'll float about the same speed as your boat. And so I like to have it maybe 20 feet, 15, 20 feet behind the boat, or off the side of the boat, and have that line with a little bit of tension on it. Because if you get too far out there, then your bobber starts to swing back and forth. Troy brings up a good point. What style of bobber? It really doesn't matter that much.
Yeah,
I personally like the wider bobbers, just because generally you'll have like a little bit of wave action, and so I feel like your bait kind of moves around a little bit more. But if you're strictly going for like a more smooth pull, like something that's a little bit thinner is going to pull through the water easier. So
Well, and
it
the one
just,
thing is you're not going to need to focus on like, oh my God, I love rocket bobbers. You don't need a rocket bobber because this is
No.
not a casting competition. Like when you get this bobber out there to float with you, you're just, again, like we were doing our trolling before, you just kind of just like a little slight cast out there. I mean, if you have really skittish fish and you want a little bit farther, that's fine. But there's no point where I'm drifting a bobber and like hard casting in any direction.
no. And, you know, I really like the Widowmaker Guide Series bobbers. I just got those a few weeks ago. So I've been using, or, you know, probably a month and a half ago now, but I've been using those quite a bit and those have been really nice. I've kept it on my rod because one thing that I really like about it is their foam. So they're soft. So now I'm like, when I'm casting docks and stuff, I'm not like hitting the post of a dock and it's like ding. It just like is soft. So it's pretty nice. And then the paint doesn't chip off. So I don't know. So that's been really nice. And it did drift really well. You
Josh
can
is out here just target practice casting his bobber and everything.
but you can you know, you can upsize your bobber too if you're having a problem. Like I usually just use the same 32nd ounce that I usually use. But if you're having trouble seeing it, you can add a little bit of weight above your swivel and, you know, use a bigger bobber with a small presentation. This is also a really good time if you're on a bug bite. You can drift bug plastics, you can drift anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be a swimming plastic. As long as you're just, you know, if once in a while your bobber hangs up on a weed and you pop it off of there, then that's perfect. Then you're staying in the right zone, you're covering water, and everybody should have fun at that point. So that's always a good tactic when it's a little bit too slow to drift, you know, jigs like twister tails and stuff effectively. That's a really good tactic that I like to use too. And so I was really happy that we got to pull that out because that did really help us a lot. I think it really helped me pinpoint what types of weeds, because the lake we were on had a really big weed flat and there was all different kinds of weeds in it and you'd have pockets of different stuff. And I just started to notice that we'd get like a fish by this one type of weed. So then when I was looking at shorelines, I was trying to pick those out. Yeah. And I thought it turned out to be a pretty decent weekend. You can hear Emily giggling in the background.
The thing is, we were comparing it to when we were there last, and it was fall.
Emily was
and it was
comparing,
September.
and she wants to go out there and
It was
catch
a
like
great bite.
16-inch crappie
awesome.
sand over fish.
If they're out there, I'm gonna look for them. I'll tell you that. I don't know, and that's the thing is, but we had great bluegills.
Yes,
we had all kinds of fish, and you know they were doing their almost fall things. And that's a great time of year to fish. It just was great. It was great. It was so fun. And so this past weekend it was fun. But even the resort owner, even other people who fish consistently this time of year, they were all saying it's kind of slow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is, it's like, we did have a great weekend. It was great fishing. Like there's no denying that. We caught some really great fish. We were in a flowage system up there. There's all kinds of flowage systems up there. And that's the thing is when you have fish that are that river type fish, I'm not saying that we were in a river. That wasn't necessarily the case, right? But when you have a flowage and river type fish, they have more shoulders on them. They're thick fish. They're good fighters. It just is awesome. I don't know. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go and fish flowage and you will see what I mean, like right away. Those fish, they just got it going for them. And so it was a great time. It was a great time. But compared to the way that lake fished a year ago, no, it was terrible. So, I mean, the other thing is, you know, there was tons of pleasure boaters out there, which is great. And you love to see people like recreating and enjoying the outdoors, but me enjoying the outdoors means less of them. And so again, that crummy weather and that cooler temperatures last year just really had it going for me. So who knows? But I mean, I guess there is a moral to the story is, you know, there is some great bites to be had in summer, but there are some great bites to come. And so if you are out there and you're still trying to hone in where the bite is or what the fish are biting on, that's okay, because there's tons of summer left. There's tons of open water left. And then we're on to ice fishing. And then we all love that. So I'm not looking to get ahead of myself because we still got some time before that.
Yeah.
But remember, even though it's open water, this is the time of year to be keeping your eye out for those cribs, those rock piles, those different structure edges that we talked about. And as we're going into fall, we're talking about those weed edges. Some of them start to slowly disappear as we go into winter. And so watch the ones that exist, watch where they're at, because that's where those fish hold into those other winter patterns. So again, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but these are the clues that you can start to gather now. And it sounds like we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we're really, I guess not. So hopefully you're out there. Hopefully you're seeing these things. Hopefully you're catching fish. And
yeah, and all I was going to say is, if you haven't yet, make sure you get all your ice fishing stuff charged, because this is that time of year. You want to get it all charged up, make sure everything's ready, because it's coming soon.
Yeah, it's good for the batteries. That's not really that soon, but it's good for the batteries.
It's coming.
So let us know, I guess, how your fishing season is going, what you're catching, what the fish are biting on. What's been I always feel like I have a bait of the year, right? And
you're
maybe
the inline spinner queen.
Well, yeah, I've just been trying new things, right? So that's kind of fun. But let me know if you've been trying new things or what's been hot on your lake, because maybe I'll start trying that too. And other than that, I think we're going to be working on lining up some more guests for some of these coming weeks. We got a lot of open water fishing to do.
Yep.
I keep saying to Josh, maybe we should do another episode live on the lake. I know that we did that just one time. It was kind of a pain, but it did kind of work. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Try it.
We'll see what Josh thinks. We'll see if we can find a lake. Depends on our internet service.
Yeah.
But I guess with that, thanks for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you on next week's edition of The Night Bite.
Night, everybody.